right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I'm Anna Palmer, the CEO and one of the founders of Punchbowl News. We are thrilled to be in Chicago, activating at our first convention since we launched our business in 2021. I want to personally thank the Punchbowl News team who has been working months on this activation to bring it to life, and in particular our sponsors who made this happen, including presenting sponsor ExxonMobil. We've got a great day planned for you. We have a CEO Roundtable. We're also going to have a conversation with Representative Leslie Fletcher, as well as a fireside chat with Dr. Vijay Swarup from ExxonMobil. Later, we've got an ice cream social where I know a lot of members are going to be coming, as well as a conversation with Senator John Hickenlooper. We're going to close the evening off because it's conventions with some cocktails, so we hope you will stick around for that. You can come in and out throughout the day. We are streaming our editorial conversations this morning on X, and we always encourage you to share from our conversations. You can find Punchbowl News on all social media platforms at Punchbowl News. We are going to kick off the day with a conversation focused on America's energy. We're going to be talking about a cleaner energy and what's happening going forward in America. With that, we have America's Energy as our presenting sponsor for this conversation, and I'd like to encourage the CEOs to join me on stage. All right, sure. We've got Jason Grummett from American Clean Power. We have Karen Harbert, President and CEO of the American Gas Association. Dan Brillier, who is CEO of EEI, Edison Electric Institute. And Maria Korsnick, President and CEO of the Nuclear Energy Institute. Thank you all so much for joining me this morning.
Good to be here.
All right, well, it is presidential election season, and energy is always top of mind. Prices, what's happening with the demand curve, and so it is a great conversation to start this morning here at the HQ. And I want to go kind of from that 100,000-foot level. From each of your vantage points, can you talk about where you see the industry going in the next 5 to 10 years, particularly as you think about emissions and kind of the future of clean energy?
Well, first of all, lovely to be here. For those of you who were with us at the RNC, I started out by saying it's good to be with the cool kids. But like dragon fruit, like you guys are raising the bar, so very special.
All for you, Jason.
All right, let's just kind of to situate maybe the beginning of the conversation. 2 stats. Last year, 78% of all of the new electricity brought on the grid came from wind, solar, battery storage. Over 2/3 of that renewable deployment was made by companies with fossil assets. Right? So the old days of cotton candy and unicorns versus like The Shining just does not, it's not what we are about anymore, right? We are all here together because our electrons and our molecules are all part of the same solution. And I think, the only other piece of that worth sharing at the beginning is just like all of you, our technologies have unique strengths and unique weaknesses. It turns out if we're good at combining the strengths of these different technologies, you can actually tell a credible story that we can get in 25 to 30 years an economy that is reliable, secure, affordable, and clean. And so that's really, I think, why we came together as the kind of American energy industry to co-host these discussions.
The cool kids, I love it. So we're still part of the cool kids. That's good. I'm going to
tell
my son and daughter that we're
kids.
The cool kids and they're not. I see things 5 to 10 years a lot like they are today, which is we're investing, we're growing, we're innovating, and we're essential. I thank all the utilities, the gas utilities, the electric utilities that are making all of this possible at the Convention Center, at the United Center, and here. I think it's really important for people to understand how essential we are to everyday life. And it's not just, during a convention. It's every day. 189 million Americans use natural gas in their homes. That's more people than voted in the last presidential election. And that's only growing. We grew faster last year than we did the year before. And I think it's because we're proving that we're reliable, we're affordable, and we can reduce emissions with natural gas. From the business side of things, 5.7 million businesses use natural gas, and that has allowed them to reduce their costs for energy by $500 billion over the last decade. So it's real, it's material, it's reliable, it's affordable, and I see that as our North Star for the next 5 to 10 years.
Man, I agree with all of that. I like the cool kid thing, and I'm looking at all this whiskey back there. You think we can move that cocktail hour up a little bit? Nice.
We have mimosas, Bloody Marys, whatever you need, Dan, we got it for you.
I'm looking at that. It's quite impressive, actually. Thank you, Anna, for inviting me, and thank you for having this panel. It's a very important conversation, I think, not only for us to have here today, but for the country to have as we move forward. Another quick stat, Jason, for you. You know, I was talking to Fatih Birol recently at IEA, and he tells me that over 20% of the new demand between now and 2026, which is only 2 years away, is going to come from AI, and it's going to come from data centers. So that's going to challenge this industry in a way that perhaps it hasn't been challenged in over 50 years. And we can look at that as a challenge, or we can look at it as an opportunity. It's an opportunity for us to reinforce the need for energy, to reinforce all fuel sources as we look across the, we're certainly going to make things like natural gas and coal and others more emissions friendly, if you will, for lack of a better way to describe it. We're very supportive of technologies like carbon capture, but I think it's important for us to realize that we're going to need all of these fuel sources to meet that demand. It's going to force us to be more innovative as well. And I'm excited about how the DOE laboratory system, the industry itself is stepping forward and really leading the charge. I was talking to Vijay earlier from Exxon. What he did at R&D at Exxon, I think we need to replicate in other parts of our industry. It's very important that we do this. There is an example here, however, when we think about it, and I think about the opportunity. We think back, I see Dan Poneman. There's Dan Poneman right there. Dan knows the story very, very well. When we enriched uranium to make nuclear warheads during the beginning of the Cold War in the 1950s, we used a technology called gaseous diffusion. And back then, that process took approximately 10% of the entire nation's electric capacity. It's enormous, enormous. And when we think about AI, it has the ability to do the same thing. It can consume about 10% of our nation's electricity capacity. But we met the challenge. We built infrastructure. We built generation. And the nation survived and we thrived. And I think we can do the same thing today if we look at this challenge as really an opportunity. And I'm excited about that. I really am.
Maria.
Great. Well, thank you, Maria Korsnick with the Nuclear Energy Institute. 5 to 10 years from now, nuclear is going to be thriving. So, yeah. So if you look at everything that you just heard here, right, a huge demand is coming our way. It's coming our way not only for AI and machine learning, but also we're trying to electrify things because we want to transition that fuel to a cleaner fuel. So there's a huge demand coming on the electricity supply. Nuclear is carbon-free, highly reliable, round the clock, regardless of the weather. And we should be very proud of our nuclear fleet today. We operate these things really, really well. Best in the world. Last 20 years, more than 20 years, we've had a greater than 90% capacity factor. So you don't do that because you got lucky. You do that because you're damn good. And so we should be very proud of the fleet we have, maintain and extend that fleet, and build new. And the innovation pipeline, what Dan was just referring to from those national labs, all kinds of great ideas. Nuclear is going to come in large, medium, small, and really small, which means we have all kinds of ways to help meet this demand and pair with these other technologies.
I want to take that thread a little bit further, the innovation and what's happening in American energy. In particular, we were talking backstage a little bit about kind of the rising demands of power, AI, data centers that are happening, and then also thinking about clean power jobs. What is the future? How are we kind of setting that up for success? So Dan, I'm going to start with you. Can you talk about how the electric industry is thinking about infrastructure investment?
Yeah, well, I think, what I think about it in the innovation side of the infrastructure development are things like what I see happening down with, Duke Energy Florida, for instance, applying self-healing technologies to the grid, allowing that grid to really fix itself. I know that sounds really strange, but there are technologies available today that allow us to do that in real time. So especially in catastrophe-prone areas, perhaps like Florida, Louisiana, where I grew up, hurricanes are a pretty common occurrence, or in places in the West where you may deal with wildfires, or even other parts of the country you may deal with wildfires. It's the application of that type of technology that's going to allow us to develop more energy and have the energy available when people want it, because that's the challenge we face today. It's not only the application of new technologies, it's making sure it's available 24/7. No one wants their Wi-Fi to go down when they're at work.
Talk to the journalists who've been in the hall. It's been a challenging Wi-Fi situation.
Exactly, yeah.
Jason, I want to turn to you. Talk a little bit about the multi-tech clean energy industry, which you represent, growing demand, innovation. What are you seeing?
So it's a pretty exciting time for all of us. What I'm seeing is a question of pacing, right? This is all just about speed and scale. I think it's pretty obvious that innovation in technology is moving much faster than innovation in democracy. The technology is excellent and getting better. The private industry has the capital and the commitment to build things really fast. We are finding it very difficult to have the government make decisions that enable us to modernize the country at the speed that we need to. So, hopefully we'll talk a little bit about some really positive energy coming out of the Senate recently. But here's the biggest challenge. It's just timing. We have a huge surge in the next 10 years, and we basically have to use the technologies we have now. Really excited about small modular reactors. I think if you have an investor willing to lose a couple $1 billion, you can maybe get one in here really fast, but most of these are going to be in the next decades. And so how do we invest in existing technologies, including fossil technologies, and not lock ourselves into investments that are at odds with the need to decarbonize over the next 25, 30 years? We have to have an economic system and a creativity of evolution that allows us to make those investments and not have them have 50-year payback periods.
Karen, I want to turn to you. We're at the DNC. There's a lot of talk about the environment and what's happening with the energy industry. Can you talk a little bit about how the gas industry is trying to reduce emissions while also keeping energy prices low?
Absolutely. So we have 2.7 million miles of pipeline already in the ground. Our first job is to continue to modernize that, make it as clean and tight as possible, delivering clean natural gas today, but investing in the fuels of the future. We now have close to 800 renewable natural gas projects up and running in almost all of the 50 states. So it's taking waste from landfills, from wastewater treatment plants, from dairy farms, poultry farms, taking that methane, cleaning it up and putting it into our system, solving today's problems with the technologies that we're going to continue to grow over time. And of course, we're all excited about hydrogen. It's going to affect all of us in one way or another, but we're all investing in hydrogen. We've got about 40 projects today up and running. And what this has allowed us to do is the natural gas industry has reduced our emissions by 70%. And now we've allowed the electric industry, because we're now 40% of your supply, to be accounted for 60% of the reduction in emissions for the electricity side. So we take our emissions reduction seriously. We're proving it out in real time, and we're developing the technologies for tomorrow.
Maria, I want to give a question here before I go to the whole group and kind of change topics here. We're hearing more about nuclear all the time, especially when it comes to investment following the Inflation Reduction Act. Can you talk about that?
Sure. As I mentioned, the innovation pipeline for nuclear is full and ready to work its way into the marketplace. And so here in the rest of this decade, you're going to see some micro reactors come on. You're going to see some pilot projects with small modular reactors end of this decade into the early part of the 2030s. And imagine this is having an idea now of sort of what the options are. And then we see really in the 2030s a significant build out. And I would share that this isn't just a U.S. conversation, right? We're teaming very closely with Canada on some of these designs, but I travel all around the world. At the recent COP, Conference of the Parties, a large environmental conference that happened at the end of last year, some termed that the nuclear COP. I mean, we had 25 countries that signed to triple commercial nuclear by 2050. This is in contrast to a few years ago, you wouldn't even have heard the word commercial nuclear power. So to say that we're at a transition in terms of the importance of nuclear, I think everybody appreciates around the world how important it is to have that reliable, affordable system, and that commercial nuclear simply has to be a part of that solution. And I would go on to say that things like the Inflation Reduction Act, which has production tax credits for either investing or for completing a build, a production tax credit, really encourages this kind of a new build.
I want to shift topics a little bit to jobs. Always a central issue on the campaign trail. A lot of what we're focused on in terms of figuring out what is the next generation of an energy worker look like. Can you talk about what you're doing to train the workforce in order to have people that are trained, skilled, ready to go, as well as you have that kind of pipeline, pun intended, of folks who are actually ready to and willing to take those jobs?
So this is the best problem our industry has, right? There's about 460,000 people currently employed in the clean energy sector, and we believe we need to hire 500,000 more people over the next decade or so. Like, yay, right? Like, find me a politician who does not love that sentence. The pipeline doesn't exist, right? We don't have those people, and we don't have the effective connections. I mean, there was a couple of kind of green job head fakes over the last 10 years, right? There was a lot of exuberance. We got people excited, and there weren't jobs. We lost some traction there. We now are real. And I think one of the things we're trying to figure out also is how the skill sets across these industries overlap. So I think, we're spending a lot of time in the Gulf talking about offshore wind. The skill set of the offshore oil and gas folks, off the charts, right? A lot of those folks are now starting to look across these kind of industry opportunities. We all need electricians. We all need a lot of electricians. And we don't want to be fighting for them, right? So we have to figure out how to train them together.
Well, we call this the great crew change because 50% of all today's workers in the utility industry are eligible to retire over the next 10 years. So the growth gap is in the job force is big and real. But it's also not the jobs of yesterday or your father's utility, right? I mean, we're looking for drone operators, satellite operators. We're looking for people that can code. So it's cool jobs. We're the cool kids. We got cool jobs. And I think people need to recognize that it's not just about the old production technologies. I mean, we're being able to pull more out of the ground with a much smaller footprint because of technology. We can move it faster, cleaner, cheaper because of technology. And so there's really interesting jobs. We're partnering with community colleges. Not everybody needs a 4-year degree to be successful in this business. Working with our labor unions, working with different institutions across the country because we need workers, not just in Houston or Louisiana. We need them in all 50 states. And so cultivating those relationships, encouraging people to be involved in their communities, because all of us are some of the biggest contributors to the health of our communities because we live and work in the same place. So the workforce is real, but we're getting really creative at attracting new talent, younger talent into the workforce.
Yeah, we're doing a lot of the same things as well. So I agree with everything that was just said. And I think back to my own personal experience. So I came up through one of those programs. I started my energy career as a pipeline welder. That's what I did. So I was in trades. And I went to a trade school, learned how to do that very well, got certified. Welded a lot of your pipelines, actually, down in Louisiana and Houston. It's important.
Karen, check those.
What's
Exactly. Were you cool back then? Or?
Exactly. No, it's important that we support those programs. And I see Lloyd Yates out in the audience. And Lloyd and I just got back from an important conference up at Martha's Vineyard where we talked a lot about the need to expand our industry and the need to look further for labor and for work and for technicians and for talent. And at EEI, we're going to do a lot of that as well. So we're going to expand into, looking at these training programs at HBCUs, for instance, and make sure that we're pulling that talent into our industry as well. Because as Jason, I agree with you, it's short. Talent is short. And we just have to work hard to find more people, to train more people, to bring them into our industry.
It sounded like hardship duty. Martha's Vineyard.
Oh, I was going to say, wait a minute, hold on. Pipeline welding?
You've come a long way, Dan.
Well, pipeline welding is hardship duty, believe me. Martha's Vineyard was actually quite nice.
I'll jump in real quick and I'll let you go to the next. But I would just share in nuclear, a lot of times people think, oh, you need nuclear engineers to run that. And yeah, you need a few of those. But actually, in nuclear, we boil that water a little bit differently. But once you turn it into steam, it's a power plant just like the other power plants. And so we welcome, for example, the great talent that we have in our coal industry. In fact, when I ran a power plant in New York, when we had refueling outages, we would bring down the fossil fuel folks and help us with our refueling outages. So I can speak directly to say we work, hand in hand because it's a power plant. You need the mechanics, the electricians, the INC techs, et cetera. So there are going to be plants in this transition that they'll be deciding to close. And we welcome those workers to be able to transition them into nuclear plant workers. And I know that's going on right now. And we work also very closely with the unions, as was mentioned here. And already they're increasing the union workforce. What's beautiful about this is that the same workers, they're building the data centers that need all that energy. And so they're increasing their numbers to build those data centers, and we can use some of those workers as well to run the power plants that are going to run the data centers.
All right, it wouldn't be a Punchbowl News event if we didn't get into some policy and what's actually going to happen in Washington. We are obviously days away from closing the DNC, 70-some days until the election. Permitting reform. It has been something that has had a lot of starts and stops and promises and hopes and dreams that have been crushed. Is it going to happen? Do you think it happens next Congress?
So we got to start calling it modernizing America. No one really knows what a permit is or really cares to reform it. We have an actual shot because of a very courageous bipartisan effort in the Senate Energy Committee. It is easy to bet against Washington, right? So, give me a piece of legislation, I'll tell you it probably doesn't happen, right? Apple pie is our favorite food, probably doesn't happen. But we have a shot, and it would be part of an end-of-the-year package. And I think the reason we have a shot is kind of us, right? There's no longer this sense of, wait, I need my stuff permitted, but I kind of hate on your stuff. We all are actually supportive of the basic premise of having more efficient governance. We're all supportive of states having the kind of initial role in the process, but not just letting kind of that slow roll the nation's interests. We're all supportive of making sure there's community engagement that honors environmental concerns. There's a way to do it, but it's going to require a real shake. And things are not like they are usually, Anna, when it comes to how things pass the House of Representatives. So you could imagine if there was a suggestion from a certain individual who thinks there's trillions of dollars of liquid gold right beneath our toes, that this legislation would enable that progress, you could see the bill pass the House.
It's unifying. I mean, Jason is exactly right. I mean, when people on the, whether you're the far left, far right, in between, we're all unified in the fact that we need this modernizing America. I'm going to switch no more permitting reform.
Rebranded it right here on stage.
Right there. You broke news. Punchbowl right now. We're going to trademark that. But it really is unifying. I was able to go up with a number of my colleagues and more that are not on this stage to the problem solvers and saying, if you really want to do something that's going to solve a problem, we're right here to be right behind your back. And so I think the Senate bill has a chance. We're all going to do as much as we can to get it over the finish line. And if it doesn't happen by the end of the calendar year, we're all going to fight like hell next year.
Yeah, I can't say I disagree with that. It's, and Jason pointed this out earlier, there's a lag between regulation and innovation, and I think that's more and more widely accepted on the Hill. So I think we're now at the point where you can see this happening. You can see this getting over the finish line. And if I had to make a prediction today, I think it will. They finally found enough political will to close that gap.
So we're advancing America. And we just passed the Advance Act on the Hill, 393 in support, 13 against, and in the Senate, 88 for, 2 against, all about advancing commercial nuclear power and making the regulator a more efficient process. So it can be done, and there's strong bipartisan support for nuclear. It's happening, and as soon as that Advance Act was passed, we submitted something to the regulator that would take something that would normally take 5 years and make it 4 months. So it's going to be a journey, but we're working it.
All right, we are quickly going to get the hook here, but before we do, I want to we'll start with Maria and back to Jason. We'll give you the last word. If there was one thing that you want our audience here in person and on the live stream to take away from this conversation, what would it be, Maria?
We need to build nuclear power.
We need to build infrastructure for energy. All of it, all of the above.
I'd like you all to know that we're all in together on making energy affordable, reliable, resilient, and clean. And all of us have a different seat at that table, but we're all in.
We all have the same aspiration: reliable, affordable, secure, clean. We use different order based on our kind of gestalt of the moment. There are tensions between those desires, and we have to face up to our weaknesses as well as our strengths and think about a cadence between now and 30 years from now about how we get from here to there.
All right, with that, Jason, Karen, Dan, Maria, thank you all so much for joining us and kicking us off here at the Punchbowl News HQ in Chicago. A big thank you to America's Energy for partnering with us to bring this conversation to life. We are going to take a short break, and then we're going to be back with one of our main stage conversations with Representative Lizzie Fletcher from Texas. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.